Do you believe in time travel? What about parallel worlds existing right alongside our own? Most people dismiss these ideas as pure science fiction. But what if we told you there are real, documented cases that challenge everything you think you know about reality? We're talking about exposed stories with evidence so compelling that even the biggest skeptics struggle to explain them away. If you're convinced there's always a logical explanation for everything, we're genuinely curious how you'll rationalize these 15 absolutely mind-bending cases. So let's dive straight into the first one. And trust us, this one is truly incredible. Number 15. The vanishing of the Dorada Express in 1932. This incident is said to have truly happened, and it remains one of the most chilling events ever connected to unexplained time anomalies. On September 14th, 1932, the Dorada Express departed from Buenos Aires, Argentina, carrying 89 passengers bound for the mountain resort town of Mendoza. The train was considered the height of luxury at the time. Wealthy businessmen, aristocratic families, and foreign diplomats filled its elegant carriages. The first several hours of the journey proceeded without incident. Passengers dined in the restaurant car. Children pressed their faces against windows, watching the vast Argentine plains roll by. No one could have imagined that within hours, every single person aboard would vanish from existence. The trouble began as the train approached the Cordova mountain pass. Witnesses at a small station reported seeing the locomotive enter a tunnel carved through solid granite. They heard the familiar whistle. They saw the lights of the carriages flickering through the darkness. And then nothing. The train never emerged from the other side. Rescue teams were dispatched immediately. Engineers examined every inch of that tunnel, which stretched only 400 meters through the mountain. There was no wreckage, no bodies, no sign that anything had ever passed through. The tracks were undamaged. The tunnel walls showed no marks of collision. It was as if the Dorada Express had simply ceased to exist somewhere between entering and exiting that passage through the rock. Absolutely insane. But here's where the story takes an even stranger turn. In 1987, a historian researching colonial Spanish documents in a Mexican archive discovered something extraordinary. Buried among records from 1845 was an account describing a group of confused Spanish-speaking travelers who appeared suddenly in the Mexican countryside near Guanajuato. According to the documents, these people claimed to have been passengers on a train, a concept that baffled the local authorities since Mexico's first railroad wouldn't be built for another 3 decades. The travelers described their journey, their destination, and the precise date they had departed. September 14th, 1932. Among the artifacts recovered from these mysterious visitors was a woman's pocket watch. The inscription on its back read, Buenos Aires, 1929. This watch is reportedly still preserved in a private collection in Mexico City. For some, it's merely a curious antique. For others, it's undeniable proof that the passengers of the Dorada Express were somehow transported 87 years into the past. A fascinating and deeply unsettling thought. Number 14. The future memories of Dr. Ilara Vance. The case of Dr. Ilara Vance stands apart from typical time travel accounts because it involves not physical displacement, but a complete transfer of consciousness across centuries. In 1954, Dr. Vance was a respected psychiatrist practicing in London. Following a severe cardiac episode that left her clinically dead for nearly 4 minutes, she reported experiences that would challenge everything her colleagues thought they understood about the human mind. During those 4 minutes, Dr. Vance claimed her consciousness had traveled to the year 2847. But unlike a dream or hallucination, she insisted the experience possessed a clarity and coherence that surpassed her normal waking life. She described inhabiting the mind of a woman living in that distant era, seeing through her eyes, feeling her emotions, understanding her thoughts. The detail in her accounts was extraordinary. According to Dr. Vance, the world of 2847 had undergone transformations beyond our current imagination. Cities existed beneath the oceans, protected by massive transparent domes that filtered light into spectacular rainbow patterns. Humans had developed the ability to communicate telepathically, rendering spoken language almost obsolete. Disease had been essentially eradicated through technologies that could repair cellular damage at the molecular level. Most remarkably, death itself had become largely optional. Consciousness could be transferred between bodies, allowing individuals to live for thousands of years. She wrote extensively about the social structures of this future. Competition and conflict had faded. Resources were unlimited. People devoted their extended lives to art, exploration, and the pursuit of knowledge that would seem incomprehensible to us today. She described witnessing the construction of vessels designed to travel between stars, ships that would carry human consciousness to distant galaxies over journeys lasting millennia. When Dr. Vance returned to her body in 1954, she found herself fundamentally changed. She possessed knowledge she couldn't explain, mathematical concepts that she, a psychiatrist with no advanced scientific training, shouldn't have understood. She filled 17 notebooks with diagrams, equations, and descriptions of technologies that made no sense to the scientists of her era. Some of those notebooks were preserved after her death in 1971. Modern researchers who have examined them claim certain passages describe principles remarkably similar to quantum computing and nanotechnology, fields that barely existed in concept when she wrote them. Was Dr. Elara Vance's near-death experience actually a journey through time? Did her consciousness slip through some unknown gateway to witness humanity's distant future? The thought is as fascinating as it is terrifying. Number 13. The instantaneous disappearance of Thomas Cummings. The story of Thomas Cummings, a shopkeeper from Bristol, England, is one of the most disturbing accounts of apparent portal activity ever documented. On March 7, 1873, Thomas was working in his small hardware shop when he stepped into the back storeroom to retrieve a box of nails. His wife, Mary, was standing at the counter. His 2 children were playing near the front window. All 3 watched him walk through the doorway. He never came out. After several minutes, Mary called out to him. Receiving no answer, she walked into the storeroom herself. It was empty. The room had no other exits. A single small window, far too small for a grown man to fit through, remained locked from the inside. Thomas Cummings had vanished in the span of seconds, mere feet away from his family. No sound, no struggle, no explanation. The local constabulary conducted an extensive investigation. They questioned neighbors. They searched the building from cellar to roof. They even excavated portions of the floor, suspecting some hidden passage or trap door. Nothing was found. Thomas Cummings had simply ceased to exist in our reality. But what happened in the months and years following made the case truly chilling. Mary reported that she began hearing her husband's voice emanating from the storeroom, always faint, always desperate. He would call her name. He would beg for help. He would ask where he was. The children heard it too. Neighbors who spent time in the shop confirmed the strange sounds. One visiting clergyman documented that he clearly heard a male voice crying out from within the empty room. A local professor who investigated the case theorized that Thomas had accidentally stepped through an invisible doorway, a natural portal to somewhere else, perhaps another dimension, perhaps another time. The voice, he suggested, might be Thomas trapped in some space between worlds. Close enough to be heard, but impossibly far from returning. Mary Cummings maintained the shop for 3 more years, hoping her husband might find his way back. The voice reportedly grew fainter over time until it finally stopped altogether in 1876. She never remarried. Until her death in 1901, she insisted that somewhere, somehow, Thomas was still alive. Could invisible portals exist around us? Gateways we can't see that lead to places beyond imagination. And if Thomas Cummings slipped through one, how many others might have experienced the same fate without anyone to hear their calls for help? A thought that is truly terrifying. Number 12. The complete vanishing of Kellerton Village. What we're about to describe is considered one of the most unsettling mass disappearance events in documented history. In 1927, the small farming community of Kellerton in rural Montana was home to approximately 230 people. Families had lived there for generations. The village had a church, a general store, a one-room schoolhouse, It was an ordinary American town where everyone knew everyone else. Until one October morning when every single resident disappeared without leaving a trace behind. A mail carrier named Douglas Wright made the discovery. He arrived at Kellerton on October 15th expecting his usual route. Instead, he found a ghost town. Doors stood wide open. Breakfast sat cold on tables. A pot of coffee still rested on a stove, long since burned dry. In the schoolhouse, children's books lay open on desks, lessons half completed. At the church, hymnals remained open to the pages of the previous Sunday's service. Everything suggested that 230 men, women, and children had simply stopped existing in the middle of their daily lives. Search parties scoured the surrounding wilderness for weeks. Not a single body was discovered. Not a single footprint led out of town. The livestock had been abandoned in their pens, bellowing with hunger and thirst. Dogs and cats wandered the empty streets. But of the human population, there was absolutely nothing. Only one piece of evidence pointed toward any explanation at all. On the door of the church, someone had carved a message deep into the wood. It read, "They opened the door, and we followed." This cryptic sentence has haunted investigators for nearly a century. Who are they? What door was opened? Where did the people of Kellerton follow it to? Some researchers believe the residents discovered something in the woods nearby. Perhaps an ancient site or natural phenomenon that created a gateway to another place. Others theorize that the entire village was pulled into a parallel dimension through some collective event that we simply cannot understand. The carved message suggests that wherever they went willingly, following someone or something through a door that should not exist. Kellerton was never resettled. The buildings eventually collapsed and were reclaimed by the forest. Today, nothing remains but a few foundation stones and the enduring question of what truly happened on that October morning. Where did 230 people go? Did they find another world on the other side of that mysterious door? And if so, are they still there now? A thought that absolutely gives you chills. Number 11. The inexplicable case of Margaret Chen. The story of Margaret Chen is one of the most thoroughly documented cases of a person appearing from seemingly nowhere, possessing items and identification that could not possibly exist. In March 2003, a woman was found wandering in a state of confusion near the San Francisco waterfront. She was well-dressed, appeared healthy, and spoke fluent English with a slight accent no one could identify. When police officers approached her, she gave her name as Margaret Chen and asked what city she was in. The officers assumed she was a tourist who had become disoriented, but when they examined her belongings, everything changed. Her purse contained identification documents, but they were from no country anyone recognized. The passport-like booklet displayed a national seal featuring a dragon encircling a mountain, symbols that matched no known nation. Her driver's license listed an address in New Singapore, a city that does not exist. The currency in her wallet bore the portrait of a woman in ceremonial robes and text in a language that linguistic experts could not identify despite decades of collective experience. Most disturbing of all was her phone. It resembled a smartphone, but this was 2003, years before the first iPhone. The device was thin, made of a material that felt like glass but was completely flexible, and displayed text in the same unknown language found on her documents. When technicians attempted to analyze it, they found circuitry and components unlike anything in existing technology. Margaret Chen was coherent and intelligent. She expressed genuine confusion at the world around her. She described her home city with vivid detail. Massive towers that floated above the ground, transportation through tubes of light, a government led by a council called the 17 Harmonies. She insisted that the year was 2003. But her 2003 was nothing like ours. Authorities held her for 3 months while attempting to identify her origin. Every database returned nothing. No country claimed her. No family reported her missing. Her fingerprints matched no records anywhere on Earth. Then, one morning, she simply vanished from her holding room. The door was locked. No windows existed. Security footage showed nothing unusual. She was there and then she wasn't. Some investigators believe Margaret Chen came from a parallel world, a version of Earth where history followed a completely different path. The new Singapore she described might exist right now, in a dimension separated from ours by barriers we cannot perceive. And perhaps, on that March morning, she somehow slipped back through to the world she came from. But if doorways between parallel worlds can open, who else might have crossed over without us ever knowing? Number 10. The transmissions of Station RADA. Imagine receiving radio communications from someone who claims to be broadcasting from the year 1943. Except you're receiving them in 2019. This is exactly what happened to a group of amateur radio enthusiasts in Sweden. And their experience remains one of the most compelling cases of cross-time communication ever recorded. In August 2019, a radio club in Gothenburg began picking up strange broadcasts on frequencies that should have been empty. The transmissions were weak but audible. A male voice speaking English with a British accent identified himself as Sergeant William Hayes, stationed at a place called Monitoring Post Ruada, somewhere in northern Scotland. He reported observing unusual lights over the North Sea and requested confirmation from command. The radio operators in Gothenburg assumed it was a hoax or perhaps a historical reenactment. But then Hayes began responding to them directly. The conversations that followed were meticulously documented. Hayes expressed confusion when told the year was 2019. He insisted it was November 1943. He described his surroundings, a small stone building on coastal cliffs, the smell of coal smoke from the heating stove, his commanding officer named Captain Morrison. When the Swedish operators asked him questions about 1943, his answers were historically accurate in ways that would require extensive research to fabricate. Over the course of 3 weeks, they exchanged dozens of transmissions. Hayes gradually came to believe that he was somehow communicating across time. He described his daily life, the war raging across Europe, his fears about a German invasion that never came. He asked about the future. Was the war won? Was England safe? The operators grappled with how much to reveal. Then Hayes reported something extraordinary. A shimmering distortion had appeared in the corner of his monitoring post. It looked, he said, like heat rising from summer pavement. But it was indoors and perfectly stationary. He could see shapes through it, shadows moving in a place that wasn't his room. The Swedish operators recorded his last transmission. "I can hear voices from the other side. They're calling to me. I think it's a door." After that, the transmission stopped. The frequency went silent and has remained so ever since. Researchers attempted to verify the existence of Monitoring Post RADA. British military records from 1943 are incomplete, but they found a reference to a coastal observation station in northern Scotland that was abandoned under unclear circumstances in late November 1943. The commanding officer was listed as Captain H. Morrison. A sergeant assigned to the post was recorded as missing, presumed killed in action, though no body was ever recovered. His name was William Hayes. Did the Swedish radio operators genuinely communicate with a man living 76 years in their past? And if so, what was the shimmering door that Hayes described before vanishing? Where did it lead? And is it possible that somewhere, in some other time, Hayes is still trying to send messages to a future he glimpsed but never reached? Before we continue, here's a quick question for you. If you could send one message to any point in the past or future, what would it be? And when would you send it? Write your answer in the comments below. We're genuinely curious to hear what you'd choose. If you're enjoying these cases, a like and subscription would mean the world to us. Now let's move on. What comes next will challenge everything you think you understand. Number 9. The Soviet Time Traveler of Novosibirsk. The following case involves photographic evidence, official government investigation, and a mystery that Russian authorities have allegedly kept classified for decades. If the accounts are accurate, it represents one of the most compelling pieces of physical proof that time travel has actually occurred. In September 1987, workers at a construction site near Novosibirsk, Siberia, unearthed something that defied all explanation. Buried approximately 4 meters beneath the surface, in a geological layer that experts dated to roughly 300 years old, They discovered a metallic capsule. The cylinder was about the size of a briefcase, constructed from an alloy that initial analysis could not identify. When carefully opened under laboratory conditions, the contents inside sparked an investigation that would involve the highest levels of Soviet scientific administration. The capsule contained documents, photographs, and a small device that appeared to be some form of recording equipment. But it was the photographs that caused the greatest shock. They depicted the city of Novosibirsk, clearly identifiable by its distinctive landmarks, but in a form that shouldn't exist. The images showed towering structures of glass and steel that weren't built until the 1990s. They showed vehicles on the streets that matched car models from the 2000s. They showed electronic billboards displaying text in Russian alongside what appeared to be digital advertisements. Remember, these photographs were recovered from a layer of earth that had been undisturbed for 3 centuries. Among the documents was a letter, handwritten in Russian. It was addressed to whoever finds this, and signed with the name Dmitry Volkov. In the letter, Volkov explained that he was a physicist working on classified research in the year 2045. His team had developed a method of transporting small objects backward through time. The capsule was an experiment, a test to see if physical items could survive the journey and remain intact across centuries. If the capsule was ever found, Volkov wrote, it would prove their success. Soviet scientists who examined the materials were reportedly stunned. The photographic paper used a chemical composition slightly different from any manufacturing process known in 1987. The metallic alloy of the capsule contained trace elements combined in proportions that Soviet metallurgy had never achieved. The recording device, though damaged beyond function, used microcircuitry far more advanced than anything existing at the time. According to accounts from researchers who claimed involvement, the entire discovery was quickly classified. The capsule and its contents were transferred to a secure facility in Moscow. The construction workers were interviewed extensively and instructed never to discuss what they had found. The site was excavated further under military supervision, though no additional artifacts were recovered. What makes this case particularly intriguing is what has emerged since the fall of the Soviet Union. In 2003, a former scientist who claimed to have examined the capsule gave an interview to a Russian documentary team. He described the photographs in detail, matching the accounts from 1987. He stated his belief that the capsule was genuine evidence of future technology being sent backward through time. When asked why the Russian government kept it secret, he suggested they feared the implications. If time travel becomes possible in the future, it means someone from that future has already been watching us. And perhaps, he added, they've done far more than simply bury a capsule. Is there classified evidence in Moscow right now proving that time travel will eventually be achieved? Did Dmitry Volkov successfully send proof of his existence backward through 3 centuries? The thought is absolutely mind-bending. Number 8. The woman who remembered another Earth. The case of Jennifer Martinez challenges not just our understanding of time, but of reality itself. Her story suggests that parallel worlds aren't merely theoretical constructs, but actual places that people can somehow slip between. Jennifer Martinez was a high school teacher in Austin, Texas. In July 2015, she experienced what doctors initially diagnosed as a severe migraine accompanied by disorientation. When she recovered several hours later, she insisted that everything around her had changed. Not dramatically, not obviously, but fundamentally in ways that only she could perceive. She remembered a world where the famous Apollo disaster of 1986 had killed 3 astronauts during a moon landing mission. In our world, of course, no Apollo mission flew in 1986, and no astronauts died on the moon. She recalled a childhood watching a popular television series called The Adventures of Marco, which she could describe in episode-by-episode detail, complete with character names and plot lines. No such show has ever existed. She remembered a different arrangement of continents on world maps, with Australia positioned several hundred kilometers north of where it actually lies. She insisted that Nelson Mandela had died in prison in the 1980s, a claim shared by thousands of others who report the same false memory. What sets Jennifer's case apart is the physical evidence she provided. Before her episode, she had maintained a detailed journal since childhood. After her disorientation, she discovered that her journal contained entries that made no sense to her. They referenced events she didn't remember, people she had never met, a life that felt like someone else's entirely. Yet the handwriting was unmistakably her own. She also possessed photographs that seemed to prove her alternate memories. One image showed her at a birthday party with a woman she identified as her best friend since elementary school. Jennifer had no memory of ever meeting this woman. When she attempted to locate her, she found no record of anyone with that name ever living in Austin. The woman in the photograph, standing beside Jennifer with her arm around her shoulder, apparently did not exist in our world. Psychologists evaluated Jennifer extensively. She showed no signs of mental illness, brain damage, or delusional thinking. Her memories were consistent and detailed. She could describe the alternate history she remembered with the same clarity that anyone describes their genuine past. Brain scans revealed normal function. Every test confirmed that Jennifer Martinez was mentally healthy. She simply remembered a different version of Earth than the one she now inhabited. Some researchers who have studied similar cases propose that consciousness can sometimes shift between parallel worlds. Perhaps countless versions of Earth exist simultaneously, separated by barriers thinner than we imagine. And perhaps, occasionally, someone slips through those barriers, finding themselves in a world that looks almost identical, but differs in crucial ways. To that person, everyone else's memories are wrong. They alone remember the true history of a world they can no longer reach. Jennifer Martinez has spent years searching for others who share her memories, people who remember the Earth she came from. She has found some. They compare notes on shared recollections that match no historical record. They wonder together whether they'll ever find a way back. If Jennifer truly came from a parallel Earth, it raises profound questions. How many versions of reality exist alongside ours? How often do people slip between them without realizing it? And somewhere out there, is there another Jennifer Martinez living in the world this one lost, wondering why her best friend suddenly vanished from existence? A deeply unsettling thought that challenges everything we believe about the nature of reality itself. Number 7. The professor who stepped out of time. The disappearance of Professor Heinrich Schultz remains one of the most baffling cases in European academic history. A brilliant theoretical physicist at the University of Vienna, Schultz had dedicated his career to exploring the mathematical foundations of temporal mechanics. His colleagues considered him eccentric, but undeniably gifted. In 1958, he vanished from his locked laboratory under circumstances that no investigation has ever explained. Professor Schultz had become increasingly reclusive in the months before his disappearance. He spoke of a breakthrough in his research, something that would revolutionize humanity's understanding of time itself. He filled dozens of blackboards with equations that his colleagues found incomprehensible. He worked through nights, sleeping on a cot beside his instruments. Those who saw him during this period described a man possessed by a vision he couldn't quite articulate. On the evening of March the 23rd, 1958, Schultz locked himself in his laboratory and asked not to be disturbed under any circumstances. His assistant heard strange sounds from within, a low humming that seemed to vibrate the walls, occasional flashes of blue-white light visible under the door. When Schultz failed to emerge the following morning, the assistant finally broke down the door. The laboratory was empty, but empty doesn't quite capture what investigators found. Every piece of equipment sat in its proper place. Schultz's notes covered the blackboards exactly as he had left them. A cup of coffee rested on his desk, still warm. His coat hung on its hook. His shoes sat beneath his chair. Everything suggested he had been there moments before, except Professor Schultz himself had utterly vanished from the room that had no other exit. The investigation that followed was exhaustive. Police examined every surface for evidence of foul play. Scientists tried to understand the equations Schultz had left behind. Neither effort produced results. The case was eventually closed as an unexplained disappearance, and Schultz was legally declared dead in 1965. Then, in 2019, something extraordinary happened. A photograph surfaced on the internet, taken by a tourist at a cafe in Buenos Aires. In the background, seated at a small table, was a man bearing an unmistakable resemblance to Heinrich Schultz. Digital analysis confirmed that the facial structure matched photographs of the professor from 1958. But here's what makes the image truly remarkable. The man in the photograph appeared to be approximately the same age as Schultz was when he vanished. Not 61 years older, as he would be if he had aged normally. The same age, as if no time had passed for him at all. Researchers attempted to locate the man. They traced the cafe, interviewed staff, searched passenger manifests for anyone matching his description. They found nothing. The man in the photograph has never been identified. Some who have studied the Schultz case believe he actually succeeded in his research. Perhaps his experiments opened a doorway through time, and he stepped through it, willingly or otherwise. Perhaps he has spent the decades since moving through different eras, unstuck from the normal flow of time, occasionally glimpsed but never caught. If such a thing is possible, it would explain both his impossible disappearance and his equally impossible appearance, unchanged, more than 6 decades later. Did Professor Heinrich Schultz crack the code of time travel in his Vienna laboratory? Is he still out there somewhere, walking through eras as easily as we walk through rooms? The thought that someone might have achieved such power and might be exercising it right now is both exhilarating and deeply disturbing. Number 6. The man erased from existence. What we're about to describe is not an old case from dusty archives. It happened in 2014. It was investigated by multiple law enforcement agencies across 3 countries, and it remains completely unsolved because the central figure in the case appears to have never officially existed at all. On the morning of August 7th, 2014, a body was discovered on a beach near Lisbon, Portugal. The deceased was a male, approximately 40 years old, in good physical condition. He wore expensive but unusual clothing, styled in a manner that didn't match any contemporary fashion. He carried no wallet, no phone, no identification of any kind. Most strangely, every single label had been removed from his garments. Every tag, every brand marking, every indication of where his clothes had been manufactured had been carefully cut away. The autopsy revealed no cause of death. The man had simply stopped living. His heart, his brain, his organs showed no disease, no trauma, no explanation for why they had ceased to function. He appeared to have died from nothing at all. Portuguese police began an international investigation. They circulated his photograph to agencies worldwide. They ran his fingerprints through every database available. They submitted DNA samples to genealogical services. Every result came back the same: negative. This man matched no records anywhere on Earth. He had never been arrested, never applied for a passport, never registered for any government service, never paid taxes, never enrolled in school, never visited a hospital. In an age when every person leaves countless digital traces, this man left none. The investigation deepened. Forensic specialists examined his teeth and found dental work unlike any technique used in modern dentistry. The materials in his fillings matched no known compounds. Analysis of his bone structure revealed healed fractures that had been repaired using methods that orthopedic experts couldn't identify. Then, investigators discovered a single item they had initially overlooked. Sewn into the lining of his jacket was a small metallic disc about the size of a coin. When examined under magnification, it displayed engraved text in a language that linguists could not place. The symbols resembled no known alphabet, ancient or modern. Yet there was something disturbingly systematic about them. A clear grammatical structure suggesting a sophisticated, developed language that simply doesn't exist in our historical record. Some investigators who worked the case became convinced that they were dealing with something beyond conventional explanation. One theory that gained traction was that the man had come from a parallel dimension, a version of Earth that developed differently from ours, with different languages, different technologies, different history. Perhaps in his world, there was no Portugal, no Lisbon, no international databases to record his existence. He died in our world, but he had never lived here. Others suggested something even more disturbing. Perhaps he was from the future, a time so distant that everything about his origin had diverged from our present. The removed labels might have been his own doing, an attempt to hide evidence that would have revealed too much. The strange dental work, the unidentifiable language, the clothing that fit no known style. All could be artifacts of a civilization that hasn't emerged yet. The case was never solved. The body was eventually buried in an unmarked grave in a Lisbon cemetery. But the metallic disc remains in evidence storage, its mysterious inscription still undeciphered, a message from somewhere else that we may never understand. Who was he? Where did he come from? And why did he die on a Portuguese beach so far from whatever home he knew? Number 5. The Immortal Traveler. Throughout history, certain figures have appeared whose lives seem to defy the normal limitations of human existence. None is more famous or more perplexing than the individual known as the Count of Saint-Germain, a man who may have unlocked the secrets of eternal life and time itself. The Count first emerged in European high society during the 1740s. He claimed no origin, offered no family history, and deflected every inquiry about his past with elegant evasion. What he did demonstrate, however, was a constellation of abilities that left witnesses astonished. He spoke at least 12 languages fluently, including several ancient tongues. He played multiple musical instruments with virtuoso skill. He painted masterpieces that critics praised for centuries afterward. He possessed knowledge of chemistry, metallurgy, and medicine that exceeded the most learned scholars of his age. But it was his apparent agelessness that truly set him apart. Those who met the Count in the 1740s described him as appearing roughly 45 years old, elegant and vital. Those who met him in the 1780s, 4 decades later, described a man who looked exactly the same, not similar, identical, as if the years had simply forgotten to touch him. The Count himself made extraordinary claims. He told the Countess von Georgi that he had attended the wedding of Mary Queen of Scots in 1558. He described conversations with Leonardo da Vinci in intimate detail that suggested first-hand experience. He spoke of ancient Rome as though he had walked its streets. Most listeners assumed he was simply an imaginative storyteller, but his knowledge of these historical periods was uncannily accurate, filled with details that wouldn't be verified by historians until centuries after his apparent death. That death was recorded in 1784 in the German province of Schleswig. The Count was reportedly buried in a local church. Case closed. Except the sightings didn't stop. In 1789, he was reportedly seen in Paris during the early days of the French Revolution, warning acquaintances of the bloodshed to come. In 1821, he allegedly appeared in Vienna. In 1867, witnesses claimed to have met him in Milan. In 1912, a man matching his description was photographed at a gathering in London. In 1972, a French television presenter interviewed a man claiming to be Saint-Germain, who demonstrated knowledge no living person should possess. Some believe the Count discovered an alchemical secret, an elixir of immortality that has allowed him to walk through centuries as other men walk through years. Others propose a different explanation. Perhaps the Count was not merely immortal, but something far stranger. Perhaps he was a time traveler, someone who discovered the ability to move through history as easily as we move through space. His seemingly impossible knowledge of events spanning centuries could be explained if he had actually witnessed them. His unchanging appearance could result from living outside normal time entirely. If the Count of Saint-Germain still exists today, watching our world from whatever vantage point eternity provides, what does he see? Has he guided humanity through crucial moments in history? Does he walk among us now, wearing a different name but the same unchanging face? And could his secret, whatever it might be, eventually become available to all of us? An absolutely fascinating thought. And if you think that was incredible, prepare yourself. What comes next will push the very boundaries of belief. Number 4. The photographs from the year 4100. In early 2020, a video appeared online that immediately ignited fierce debate across the internet. A man who identified himself only as James claimed to be a time traveler from the year 4100 And he had brought evidence. 4 photographs, he said, taken during his time in that distant future. Images that showed a world transformed beyond anything we currently imagine. The first photograph depicted a city unlike anything in modern architecture. Massive structures rose into a sky that glowed with an unusual orange tint. These buildings weren't standing on ground, but floating, suspended hundreds of meters in the air, by technology that James described as gravitational manipulation. Bridges of light connected the floating towers. Small vehicles darted between them like insects around flowers. Below the suspended city, the original urban landscape was visible, overgrown and abandoned, a reminder of the civilization that once dwelt on the surface. The second photograph showed what James called a restoration zone. After catastrophic climate events in the 23rd century, he explained, humanity had developed methods to repair damaged ecosystems at an accelerated rate. The image showed a lush forest growing in what had clearly been a desert, with massive machines visible in the background, pumping moisture and nutrients into the recovering landscape. According to James, by 4100, most of Earth had been rewilded, with humans living primarily in floating cities to leave the surface free for nature. The third photograph was perhaps the most striking. It showed human beings, but they were clearly different from us. Taller, with larger eyes and skin that seemed to shimmer with a faint bioluminescence. James explained that humanity had deliberately modified itself over millennia, adapting to new environments, enhancing cognitive abilities, extending lifespans. The average person in 4100, he claimed, lived approximately 500 years and possessed mental capabilities that would seem supernatural to us today. The fourth photograph showed James himself standing beside a device he identified as a temporal displacement unit. It was surprisingly small, roughly the size of a motorcycle, covered in surfaces that seemed to shift and change, even in the still image. This, he said, was how he had traveled backward. The technology had been developed in the 39th century, but was heavily restricted. Only authorized researchers were permitted to visit the past, and only as observers. Changing history was forbidden under penalty that James declined to describe. Critics immediately attacked the photographs as obvious fabrications. Digital analysis was inconclusive. The images showed no definitive signs of manipulation. But proving a negative is impossible. James himself refused to submit to detailed examination, claiming that revealing too much would endanger his ability to return to his own time. But one detail made some researchers pause. When James described the political structure of 4100, he used terms and concepts that shouldn't have existed. He spoke of a governing system called the Temporal Concordat, an alliance of civilizations across multiple time periods who had agreed to prevent paradoxes and protect the timeline. He described diplomatic relations not just between nations, but between eras. He mentioned the 26th century as though it were a neighboring country one might visit. If James was fabricating his story, he had constructed an internally consistent fictional universe of remarkable complexity. If he was telling the truth, then somewhere in our future, humanity has not only survived, but transcended every limitation we currently face. The photographs he provided might be genuine glimpses of a destiny we can barely imagine. What do you think? Could these images really show our world 2,000 years from now? Could time travelers be walking among us right now, observing our era for purposes we cannot understand? The very thought sends chills down your spine. Are you ready for the finale? Because the final 3 cases are the most extraordinary of all. Number 3. The night everyone in Millbrook vanished. The events of December 4th, 1952, in the small Vermont town of Millbrook, remain one of the most disturbing mass disappearances in American history. Unlike other cases where some explanation, however unsatisfying, was eventually proposed, what happened in Millbrook has defied every attempt at rational understanding. Millbrook was home to 87 people. Farmers, shopkeepers, families who had lived in the region for generations. The town had no particular significance, no strategic value, nothing that would attract unusual attention. It was simply a quiet New England community going about its ordinary life when everything changed. The discovery was made by a state highway department crew arriving to repair a damaged road. They found Millbrook intact, but completely devoid of human life. Every building stood undamaged. Cars sat in driveways. A dog barked from behind a fence, but there were no people anywhere. What made the scene particularly disturbing was the evidence of interrupted activity. In one home, a pot of soup still simmered on the stove. In another, a bath had been drawn, the water still warm. The general store had customers' purchases laid out on the counter, money sitting in the open register as if the shopkeeper had stepped away for just a moment. At the elementary school, a teacher's handwriting still covered the blackboard, the lesson half finished, chairs pushed back as though the children had just stood up. The investigation that followed involved local police, state authorities, and eventually federal agents. They found no signs of struggle, no evidence of panic, no indication that the residents had packed belongings or prepared for departure. It appeared that 87 people had simply ceased to exist simultaneously, in the middle of whatever they were doing, without warning or explanation. One piece of evidence stood out. In the town square, someone had written a message in the snow. The letters were large, clearly visible, apparently traced by a finger or stick. The message read, "The door opened at last." Just like the carved words found in similar cases, this cryptic statement raised far more questions than it answered. What door? Where did it lead? And why had the people of Millbrook apparently been waiting for it? Some investigators noted that Millbrook had a peculiar history. Founded in 1781, the town had been established by a group of settlers with unusual religious beliefs centered on the concept of transcendence, the idea that humanity could evolve beyond physical existence. Over generations, these beliefs had faded into local folklore, but some elderly residents in surrounding towns remembered stories. They spoke of Millbrook families who believed that someday a passage would open to a higher realm. They had been waiting for nearly 2 centuries. If such a passage did open on the night of December 4th, 1952, it offers a chilling explanation for what happened. Perhaps the people of Millbrook didn't disappear against their will. Perhaps they finally received what their ancestors had sought for generations. A door to somewhere else, a transcendence beyond our world, a journey from which no return was possible or desired. But if ordinary people in an ordinary town could find such a door, the question becomes terrifying. How many other doors exist? Where do they lead? And would we recognize one if it opened in front of us right now? Number 2, the evidence from beyond tomorrow. What we're about to describe represents some of the most compelling physical evidence ever presented for the reality of time travel. In 2016, a collection of items was anonymously donated to a private research institute in Switzerland. The accompanying letter claimed the objects had been retrieved from the year 3500. Analysis of these items has produced results that no one can adequately explain. The collection included 7 objects. A small cube that maintained a constant internal temperature regardless of external conditions. A flexible sheet of material displaying moving images despite having no visible power source. A sealed container holding water that preliminary analysis suggested was completely pure, lacking even the trace minerals present in the most filtered water on Earth. Each item was extraordinary, but it was the documentation that truly challenged understanding. The donor had included a manuscript of over 200 pages, written in English but containing concepts and terminology that made much of it incomprehensible. What could be understood described a civilization that had achieved mastery over both space and time. According to the text, by the year 3500, humanity had spread across the galaxy, establishing colonies on thousands of worlds. Time travel had been developed in the 28th century, but was strictly controlled, used primarily for historical research and the prevention of catastrophic events. The manuscript described the author's profession. He was, he claimed, a temporal archaeologist, someone who traveled to the past to study civilizations firsthand rather than through artifacts. He had visited ancient Rome, medieval Japan, and prehistoric Africa. He had witnessed events that historians could only guess at. and he had made a decision to leave evidence in our time, hoping that the knowledge might benefit humanity in ways he couldn't predict. Scientific analysis of the objects produced disturbing results. The cube's temperature regulation defied thermodynamic principles. The flexible screen contained circuitry at the molecular level, far beyond current nanotechnology. The water sample, upon closer examination, appeared to have no isotopic signature, as though it had been artificially constructed from pure hydrogen and oxygen atoms, rather than derived from any natural source. None of these properties could be replicated or fully explained by contemporary science. Critics argued that the items could be elaborate hoaxes constructed by advanced private laboratories to create a sensation. But no laboratory, public or private, could demonstrate the ability to produce any of the observed effects. The cube, in particular, has been studied by physicists from 6 countries, none of whom can explain how it maintains its temperature without any apparent energy source. If these objects are genuine artifacts from the year 3500, they represent more than proof of time travel. They suggest that our descendants will achieve capabilities we can barely imagine. They also suggest that those descendants are aware of us, watching across the centuries, and have chosen to provide evidence of their existence. But why? What message are they trying to send? And what do they hope we'll do with the knowledge that the future is not only real, but reachable? Number 1. The abyss that leads elsewhere. We've saved the most extraordinary case for last. What you're about to hear isn't an isolated incident from the past. It's an ongoing phenomenon that, according to those who have investigated it, continues to this day. It's the story of what has become known as the Ashford Anomaly, a location in rural England where the boundaries of reality appear to break down entirely. The Ashford Anomaly was first documented in 1887, when a farmer named George Ashford reported finding a depression in his field that hadn't existed the day before. The depression was circular, approximately 3 meters in diameter, and perfectly smooth, as though someone had scooped out the earth with a giant spoon. But it was what the depression contained that transformed a curiosity into a legend. Looking into the hole, Ashford saw not dirt or rock, but what appeared to be stars, a window in the ground, opening onto the night sky, even though it was midday. When he dropped a stone into the hole, he heard no sound of impact. The stone simply vanished into the void. Over the following century, the anomaly was investigated dozens of times. Its properties defied consistent explanation. Sometimes the depression showed that impossible star field. Other times, it displayed landscapes that didn't match any known location on Earth. Occasionally, sounds emanated from within, voices speaking in unfamiliar languages, music unlike any earthly composition, mechanical noises that suggested advanced technology. Objects dropped into the anomaly never returned. Animals that ventured too close sometimes disappeared entirely. But the most remarkable accounts came from those who claimed to have actually entered the anomaly and returned. In 1923, a young university student named Eleanor Marsh descended into the depression on a rope held by her colleagues. She was gone for less than 2 minutes by their measurement. When they pulled her back up, she was in a state of shock. She reported having spent what felt like several hours in a vast chamber that seemed to have no walls, only endless space in every direction. She had encountered beings there, she said, entities that communicated without words and showed her visions of times and places beyond imagination. She returned with a small crystal that shouldn't have fit in her pocket and that no analysis could identify. Eleanor Marsh refused to discuss the experience for the rest of her life. But she kept that crystal on her person always. In 1967, a team of scientists lowered instruments into the anomaly. Cameras recorded images of structures that appeared artificial but matched no known architecture. Temperature readings fluctuated wildly. Radiation detectors registered energy signatures that physics couldn't account for. Most disturbingly, when the instruments were retrieved, their internal clocks showed that several days had passed, though the equipment had been lowered for only an hour. The anomaly was eventually sealed by British authorities in 1989. Officially, the site was declared an environmental hazard. Unofficially, according to leaked documents, the government feared what might emerge from the other side. The seal was a massive concrete cap designed to prevent anything from entering or exiting. But locals report that strange lights still occasionally rise from beneath the concrete. Sounds still emerge on quiet nights. And people in the surrounding area sometimes experience missing time, hours or days they cannot account for, as though the anomaly's influence extends beyond its physical boundaries. What is the Ashford anomaly? Some believe it's a natural portal, a weak point in the fabric of reality, where different dimensions or different times press close to our own. Others think it's artificial, perhaps created by beings we've never encountered, perhaps constructed by humanity's own distant future as a bridge between eras. A few researchers have suggested the most unsettling possibility of all. The anomaly might be alive, a conscious entity that exists outside our understanding of space and time, watching us, occasionally reaching through, waiting for something we cannot comprehend. The concrete seal still stands in that English field, but seals can be broken, barriers can fall, and whatever exists on the other side of the Ashford anomaly has been there for at least 136 years, patient and unknowable, a door that has never truly closed. So what do you believe? Are these cases genuine evidence that time travel and parallel worlds exist? Or are they elaborate hoaxes, misunderstandings, coincidences that only appear meaningful? We've shown you 15 stories that challenge the very foundations of what we think we know about reality. Trains vanishing into tunnels and emerging in different centuries, consciousness traveling across millennia, portals opening in ordinary places, communications spanning decades, photographs from futures we can barely imagine, and an abyss in an English field that might lead anywhere or anywhen. The truth is, we don't know what's possible. 100 years ago, the idea of talking to someone on the other side of the planet seemed like fantasy. Today it's mundane. Perhaps 100 years from now, traveling to another time will seem just as ordinary. Perhaps it already is, and we simply haven't been told. Which of these 15 cases fascinated you the most? Which one do you think might actually be real? Tell us in the comments below. We genuinely want to know what you think. And if you've ever experienced something you couldn't explain, something that made you question the nature of time and reality, we'd love to hear about it. If this video opened your mind to possibilities you hadn't considered before, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. We have many more mysteries to explore together. Until next time, keep questioning everything. The truth might be stranger than any of us dare to imagine.